Tuesday, council voted on what they said is a new labor agreement between them and the union. We can start with kind of what the union does for its members, who's in the union, and what your role plays.
Sure. A union, in regards to Boise Police Department, their job is to make sure that every member in there kind of has a voice. We have approximately 250 members, give or take a few. And our job is to make sure that they're heard between them and kind of the management, the upper echelons of the department. We send out a lot of men and women every day into the streets. They do a lot of things, help people in crisis. And we have management who isn't necessarily on the streets every day. And so there can tend to be kind of a disconnect between the two parties. Our job as a union is to make sure that bridge is between the two parties and that both sides can be heard. As well as ensuring that officers have due process. There are certain protections and benefits that are in place through a contract between these two parties, and we just want to make sure those are being followed.
Yeah.
In essence, is kind of what a union does.
So over 200 members in Local 486. Mm-hmm. That's not every single police officer in Boise.
So Boise City Police, yeah, it's about 250, but it's the vast majority of the police department would be part of that local union.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So during this year of negotiations, obviously there was different pushbacks that are extremely detailed and lengthy. But for the Tuesday meeting, if council voted and they approved it, and we had a council member missing, but everyone who was there voted yes.
Correct.
How come you guys are coming out now and saying like there is no new labor agreement if they voted on it?
It's a great question. I'm not an attorney, but I always was under the impression that a contract requires the agreement of two parties. And we just want to make it really clear from our side. We felt like there hasn't been a very good characterization of what has actually occurred. From this union side, we've never agreed to what was proposed last week. It has been a lengthy process. It's been over a year sitting at the table between the representatives of the union and the city's negotiation team. And what was brought before city council is something that we never agreed to at all. And so I don't know the nuances and the minutia, like the implications of that, but a contract requires two parties, and so we have no idea kind of what this looks like going forward.
Right. Okay, so you guys didn't feel like as a whole union that was really what you would have rather continued negotiations?
Absolutely. And again, I want to make this super clear. This is not about money. This isn't about the pay. We appreciate City Council's willingness to give us that 3% bonus to give us the financial side, which is what City Council's purview is anyway. I appreciate their willingness to hear us out. I wish we would have felt that from the city's negotiation team at the table. We've got a much clearer olive branch from City Council.
They expressed, several of them, and I probably will include a soundbite from either Nash or Willits. Yeah. They were like, we can tell like this has been a really tough process, and we felt like we tried to do our best, but they could see the frustration from your team. So, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, it was, again, I would say disappointing, right? The city talks about transparency a lot. We feel like there hasn't been a lot of that at all, especially when it comes to a year's worth of negotiations. We feel like there is a lot of bad faith tactics that were used by the city, a lot of bad faith negotiations in general. By them, I'll talk for me personally. I don't enjoy doing this necessarily. I'm a police officer. My job is to ensure people's constitutional rights are kept secure. I work specifically down at Boise State University. I work with college students, community outreach. I don't take a particular pleasure in sitting at a table for 10 hours at a time negotiating out a 60-page contract. But when I do it, I want to do it with good intent and with good faith. because I believe that if two reasonable people come together, they can come to an agreement on something. We felt like that has not been the case.
Now, is that because the delays and like the timeline with, you know, Mayor said some of the negotiators were doged at the beginning of the year. Did that play an effect, or regardless of people able to negogiate, you know, different attorneys were on their side, did you still feel like that was the bad faith tactics?
Yeah, no, there was, I mean, where do I start?
Right.
Off the top of my head, I mean, we were told several times meetings were canceled suddenly because typically they would have somebody within the police department's command staff sitting on the city's side of the table, because a lot of the minutia we'd be talking about and the details are not within kind of like the expertise of city managers. Totally understand that. So meetings would be canceled because command staff members weren't able to be present. Completely understandable. And then the next meeting we'd have, there'd be no command staff there anyway. So the rationale wasn't really making sense to us, and all this was doing was just prolonging and delaying the negotiations, and it would lead us closer and closer to an expired contract, which is the last thing we want. The city doesn't want it, we don't want it, it doesn't help anybody. And you do mention the mediation thing. City Council talked about that multiple times. It is true, our contract has a stipulation that if we're not coming to an agreement, we reach out to federal mediation. And federal mediation, they bring in a mediator who is like a third-party person that works with both sides, and we try to come to an understanding. It's just like bringing a third person into the room and try to work it out. It is also true, like right before we went to those meetings, Doge, or you know, however you want to call it, that axed that federal program essentially to where none of them were able or available to work with us. On the union side, the frustrating part is that guy, the same guy that was assigned to us, that was going to work our case, reached out to us a few weeks later and said he was willing to do it for us privately. And so that is something that we felt that the contract, that's the implication of the contract, was to solve this through mediation. We reached out to the city and says, hey, we have a mediator. He can do it privately for us. We'll share the cost 50-50. And we never got a response back. All we were met with was silence. The only response we got back later was them wanting to go back to the table. And that was this last week when we got back to the table. We didn't receive a counter to our last proposal. What we received was a redlined 60-page contract of what was going to be imposed upon us without our agreement.
In the city council meeting / what your team had put out in the press release earlier today, there were some things that were taken away in the contract, or labor agreement, I mean, and then there were some things that were put in there that you guys just didn't agree with.
Yeah.
And like I know it's like you guys are not focusing on pay and money, but you're focusing on like there were certain rights that were taken away.
We had, so a good way to explain this is before we even started negotiations, there's something called ground rules that both parties have to agree to. Within those ground rules, one of the things we said was there's a certain point in negotiations where we can no longer bring up new things, right? Because the goal is you eventually want to get down to like what matters, and then you guys both can agree on just a few things. But if you just keep adding stuff, the negotiation will never end. What happened was this last week when they met with us, instead of seeking private mediation after the city's refusal, when we met, this new contract they handed us was full of language we've never seen before. Proposals we've never seen, articles that were introduced.
Any specifics that you guys disagree with that were added?
Even if, well, I'll even take it a step further. There were some that we might even agree with. But the point is that the entire process has now been flipped on its head. And we no longer know what to expect. There's no more order. This doesn't feel like a negotiation. For one example, one of the articles that was introduced is the idea of a ranked corporal. Cool. We have no, as a union on its face, I have no problem with that. But the point of a negotiation is to introduce an item, and then we look at it, and together we come to an understanding of what it looks like and how it's implemented. That's why we have a contract. That's why we have these protections. We can't just have things imposed upon us.
And
but that didn't happen.
There was no talk back because they tried to pass this for the budget.
Correct. So this was handed to us, and we're like, okay, we've never seen this before. And they said, okay, cool, city council's going to vote on this next week, whether you like it or not. systematically, we've had this union, this idea, this negotiation, this agreement between the police department and the city for over 50 years. And so, to me, I simply do not understand why this entire system is now being thrown away all of a sudden. We've had a good relationship with the city. We've always been able to come to an agreement. Yes, there have been issues and things have been delayed. We've always come to an understanding when it comes to this contract. And for them to simply dismiss that now and to say, whether you like this or not, we're going to impose it upon you through city council, felt, well, like, again, the purpose of a union. Our voices are no longer being heard.
So some of those things that you guys are okay with, even though it might not have been you originally like knew about them before last week, are the back pay for officers, and I was making notes during that meeting. I rewatched shorter.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick, in regards to back pay, again, the city's negotiation team never addressed back pay. That was one of the first things they said, back pay is not on the table if the contract expires. So again, we're appreciative of city council hearing us out on that and being willing to meet back pay. Because without back pay, the city would never feel the need to ever come to a contract. Because if you think about it financially, the money that you would save not having to pay these people, and you can let the contract go for a year or 2 years, and all that money you're saving in between, back pay is one of the only checks that employees can have on a city. And so the city council seeing that, understanding that, and willing to help us out on that is something, as a union, we really appreciate.
Yeah, it seemed like they were understanding that the union wasn't quite happy with. They saw we're going to add more officers, and from their perspective, they're going to get paid more. So they were okay with passing things.
Yeah, I think the city council, I think, tried to control everything they can control, right? They have certain things in their purview, and they did the best they could with what they were allowed to work with. And I think the union recognizes that, and we appreciate that from them.
But city staff is where...
Not city staff, the city's negotiation team, right?
Okay.
We have a certain body of people on the other side of the table we were working with. That was not the tone or the messaging that we were receiving from them. So one of the biggest things is what is people refer to as an evergreen clause, right? The way that, in layman's terms for me, that works is if our contract ever does expire or goes to expiration, the corpus, the entirety of the contract renews itself week by week until we come to an agreement on a new contract. So all of the rights, benefits, and protections that are in that contract hold until we come to a new agreement. For us, that's everything.
And that was taken out of this one that's through
That sudden
2030.
proposal that we received last week, there was a complete deletion to that clause. The reason why that's such a concern for us is that if we go the length of this new proposal and this contract then expires, we no longer have the ability to negotiate. We no longer as a union have the ability to speak to our employers and express the collective voice of what our officers are dealing with. We no longer have that option. And so again, in a city that promotes transparency so much, the math is not making sense to me on why they would want to silence us with something as drastic as a deleting of the Evergreen clause. Again, City Council heard that, and they were attempting through an amendment to put the Evergreen clause back into the proposal, the resolution that they passed. So I think City Council recognized the importance of that clause, put it back in for us, which we heavily appreciate, understanding that the removal of that language then removes our ability to speak.
So they did vote to include that back in before they voted?
As far as I understand, that resolution that contained an amendment from Nash, he put that back in and they voted 5-0 on it.
Okay, that's why I was confused, because I was like, I'm hearing both things, that they have it back in and that they're getting rid of it.
The union's upset that it's put in there last minute. It was never negotiated for before the final session, and then but appreciates that the city council then put it back in for their vote, and as well as this additional 3% bonus, which was intended to compensate the officers for back pay. That's what the council members said, which again was not something that the negotiation team was
wanting to do.
So, city staff negotiation, or city negotiation team took out Evergreen.
Attempted to, which again is literally the lifeblood, it's the heart of that contract. We started this contract early on purpose. The idea was we're getting a new chief. We want to be done with this contract before the new chief gets here, so he doesn't have any drama on his plate when he shows up. Clearly, that wasn't the case.
So Chief Dennison, like obviously he was in that meeting, and either what's his role in the union or these negotiations?
I haven't had a lot of personal interaction with him. I know that he's not part of the union, right? So he's an administrator for the city, and so our interactions with him are from a professional standpoint. I do not know the level of involvement he has with the city negotiations. That's just something I'm not privy to.
Okay.
Yeah, I just
because I couldn't tell like when council members were saying like we know you guys aren't happy and he's sitting in the front row. I don't know if he's like.
I mean, it probably reflects on him a little bit. You know, as a leader, it would be frustrating if your boss is hurting your subordinates and you're probably between a rock and a hard place. I can empathize with him. That probably doesn't feel good at all.
He was never present at any of the negotiation sessions.
Yeah.
Because he didn't need to be. Or because...
I don't think there's...
By the time he was...
But the prior chief was at the prior sessions before Dennison came.
Yeah. And again, the reason we wanted to be done with it before he showed up, because imagine being a brand new chief and you get dropped into the middle of this just...
Right.
It's a lot to take in, so...
Okay, so your position in the union, do you have an official position?
I'm the negotiator. I'm one of the lead negotiators. I think our biggest thing is we've never agreed to any of this. There hasn't been mutual agreement here, which is kind of that's what precipitated the frustration on our side, is that there has been no agreement. This isn't about the money. At this point, it hasn't been about the money for a while. This is about protections and rights that our officers have in order to work in this city that we love. And taking those away would basically gut this department. And I think our overall goal here is we want to go back to the table. We're not wanting to go, we don't want this to go anywhere crazy. We want to go back to the table and continue good faith negotiations.
Yeah,
that's all we want. We would love to go back to the table, and if the city's negotiating team is willing to meet us in good faith and we can have a reasonable discussion, we'd be happy. That's all we want. But this imposition that we're receiving from the city, whether we like it or not, this is not how it works. This is not transparent. This is not reasonable. If anything, it's disappointing.
Yeah. So that was my basically final question is what can happen? Can you guys go back, or is this in place until 2030 was the date?
Good. Yeah, 2029, I think.
29?
Again, we haven't even seen the language they've approved. We haven't even received it, so we don't even know what we're being told to follow now. So where this can go, I don't know. Right? That's why there's a lot of moving pieces at this point. I would hope that the city understands the possible implications that can occur from this, from a breach of contract, and that they're willing to meet with us so that we can finally come to a mutual understanding of how to move on and be done with this.
Yeah. In the meantime, our everyday police officers, that go out on the streets and put their lives on the line, are they being impacted? How are they being affected negatively from this?
Well, it is for them, right? It's been a year of negotiating. They haven't received a pay raise for over a year, but yet day and night they do go out. They ensure people's constitutional rights are kept secure. They work in the heat, in the snow, in the rain. That's what we do. I understand it's what we signed up for. But we would wish to have the support from those above us and behind us to support us and move us along. All we receive is support from our community. This community is extremely supportive of our local police. We do not want to ruin that. It's that way for a reason. That's why everyone loves it here. Everyone moves it here. Everyone wants to move here. We get it. That's why we're here. But when we don't feel that support from behind us and we don't feel that support from above us, it hurts and it's frustrating and it's disappointing, and we want to make sure our voices are heard. No, it's a good point. Just in the last 2 weeks, a lot of the benefits and protections that are found in our collective labor agreement are tied into our policy. It's tied into discipline. It's tied into benefits. It's tied into rights. It's tied into protections. And so when you have membership, police officers who are now suddenly being told this is how your world works, when legally that's not the case. And now they're having to decide, am I looking at the old contract that auto-renews itself based on mutually agreed to language, or am I now having to follow this new pile of paper that the city is suddenly telling me is our new contract even though I didn't agree to it? It's extremely confusing. And the union, we're trying to answer these questions too. We're trying to work through it. We're talking to our superiors and our leaders. They're asking up the chain. It's this continual asking up the chain of, hey, what's actually going on right now? So yeah, it's a pretty tumultuous situation.
To me, it seems like this is in place now, even though from your guys' perspective, it's like, we didn't agree on this, and an agreement is when both parties agree.
Yeah.
But they voted on it, so it will take effect.
I would assume.
But
at
you
the
guys
same
are
time,
There remains-
wanting things to change and move forward and with negotiations and come back to the table.
sure, and I hear you, and absolutely. The
Okay.
problem is, what is the purpose of a contract if it's not to be followed? Why do we have contracts? I believe a contract is to protect both parties, to lay out a very clear groundwork and framework, and if there's a breach on either side, then that is brought up and it's corrected. That's the point of a contract. A contract requires two parties to agree to it. We have a contract in place right now that auto-renews itself until a new contract is agreed upon. There is no new contract that has been agreed upon. City has decided to go forward without our agreement to it, thereby breaching our old contract. That's the current conundrum we find ourselves in. So yeah, you're like, yeah, it's going to be imposed because they said so. I agree, but at the same time, what are we supposed to do with this legally binding document then? Do we just throw that one away? And if we throw that away, what's the point of an evergreen clause at all if we're just not going to follow it?
Yeah.
Those are some of the questions we're currently hearing from the membership, we're dealing with, and that we're trying to resolve.
Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking with me. I know it's not easy to break down all of the chats and talks and
Yeah, it's not my
Legal.
forte, so I get it.